everyone, welcome back. Ready to jump into another deep dive?
Always. What are we looking at today?
Well, we're tackling this news story that's got a lot of people talking, a federal funding freeze, straight from the White House.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's gonna have some serious implications for a lot of sectors.
Exactly. We're talking potential changes to how tons of important programs get funded.
hmm
And not just like little niche things either.
No, this could be widespread.
Our main source for this deep dive is this article from the Associated Press by Chris Majerian.
Okay.
It's called Trump Orders a Funding Freeze as His Administration Reviews Federal Loans and Grants.
So we're talking research, healthcare.
Oh, yeah. Agriculture, even the arts. I mean, this freeze could have ripple effects everywhere. What do you think?
Absolutely. It's a major move by the administration. Definitely raises questions about what their priorities are and how they plan to use their power to really kind of steer federal spending.
Right. And the article lays it all out. I mean, it gives us the who, what, when, where, why of this whole thing.
Okay, so break it down for me.
Well, the Trump administration has basically put a halt on federal grants and loans, effective immediately. It's like hitting pause on a huge part of government spending.
Wow. And what's the reason they're giving for this?
They're calling it an ideological review,
Mm-hmm.
saying they want to make sure all funding aligns with Trump's executive orders. But there's definitely more to it than that, right?
Yeah, I got to read between the lines a bit.
Well, the article quotes Matthew Vaith, the acting director of the Office of Management and Budget,
Okay.
and he says, the use of federal resources to advance Marxist equity, transgenderism, and Green New Deal social engineering policies is a waste of taxpayer dollars that does not improve the day-to-day lives of those we serve.
Huh. Well, that's a pretty loaded statement. What do you make of that?
I mean, it definitely tells us something about their thinking. They're targeting programs they see as like ideologically opposed to their agenda. It's a challenge to what they consider to be progressive policies.
Yeah, it seems that way. So how is this actually playing out? Are we talking like scientists losing research grants or farmers having subsidies cut?
That's what everyone's worried about. The article talks about how Democrats and these independent organizations are really concerned about the potential impact.
Makes sense.
Like Senator Amy Klobuchar even asks, are you stopping NIH cancer trials? I mean, think about that.
Wow.
And it's not just research either. We're talking Medicaid, food stamps, disaster relief. A lot of essential programs could be affected.
Yeah, that's a lot of people potentially left hanging.
Definitely. And the article even includes some strong reactions from people like Senator Patty Murray and Representative Rose DeLauro. They're not holding back about how this freeze could really hurt vulnerable communities.
It does sound like it could create a lot of chaos and uncertainty, especially with such a sudden stop to the funding.
Absolutely. And then you have Senator Chuck Schumer, who actually calls the whole thing lawless and chaotic. He's saying it undermines the authority of Congress, who, controls the budget.
Right, that's a big concern. So it sounds like this is just the tip of the iceberg. This could get really messy.
Oh, yeah. It definitely raises some major questions about presidential power and the balance of power in our government as a whole. But we'll dive into all of that more in the next part of our deep dive, so stay tuned. I mean, it's a huge undertaking, right? Like now government agencies have to review all these programs and figure out if anything goes against Trump's executive orders.
Oh, absolutely. It's a logistical nightmare.
You've got all these programs across tons of different agencies. They all have to be looked at.
And you're talking thousands of programs.
Yeah, it really shows you how complex the government is.
It's also interconnected.
And all of this is happening with so much political division.
Oh, of course.
The Democrats are saying this freeze is a direct attack on essential programs.
Right.
And the Trump administration is claiming they're just trying to be responsible with taxpayer money.
Classic crash of ideologies.
Totally. And both sides are really digging in.
But, it's not just about politics. There are real people who will be affected by this.
The article talks about how researchers and educators and healthcare providers are all worried.
I mean, anyone who depends on that funding to keep things running.
It's scary to think about.
Yeah, it just shows that these decisions in Washington have real consequences.
On everyday people.
For sure. And that's why it's so important to stay informed.
Exactly.
To really understand these issues.
So the article brings in this guy, Paul Light.
Yeah.
He's like an expert on the federal government.
Okay.
And he has a kind of different perspective.
Oh, really?
He says the Trump administration is definitely trying to change things, pushing their agenda from the bottom up.
Okay.
But he also warns that this strategy could backfire.
How so?
He says, you can't just hassle. You've got to deliver.
Interesting.
So it's not enough to just shake things up.
Right.
They have to actually come up with solutions.
Otherwise, people will lose faith.
Exactly. But this whole thing also makes you think about, like, the bigger picture, you know?
Yeah, what do you mean?
Like, Congress is supposed to control the money,
Right.
but Trump is kind of going around them with this executive order.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, it raises questions about presidential power and whether he's overstepping his boundaries.
And it really puts a spotlight on that tension between the executive branch and Congress.
So I guess the question for our listeners is, what does this all mean for you?
Right. How could this freeze actually impact your life?
Your community, the things you care about.
We've talked about research and healthcare and social programs.
But it could go even further.
Think about things like infrastructure projects, education, the environment.
This is something we all need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. The effects of this could last for years.
It makes you think about what we really value as a society.
And how those values are reflected in the decisions of our leaders.
This whole thing is a real wake-up call.
Yeah. I mean, it really makes you think about how things work in our government.
The accountability, the role of ideology and policy.
Absolutely. We can't just sit back and watch this happen.
We need to understand what it all means.
Ask the right questions.
Hold our leaders accountable.
Exactly.
Where do we go from here? What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, this whole thing really shows how much power the president has.
To control spending.
Yeah, even though Congress is supposed to have the purse strings.
The president can still use executive orders and stuff to change how the money's used.
Right. And that's a pretty big deal.
It is. Makes you realize just how much impact one administration can have.
Even if other people disagree with them.
Yeah. And it shows how important it is to pay attention to those executive actions.
Not just the laws that Congress passes.
Because they can affect us just as much.
Sometimes even more.
And this whole situation also highlights the role of the courts.
Right. They're supposed to keep things in check.
Schumer called this freeze lawless, remember?
Yeah.
So there could be legal challenges.
And it'll be interesting to see how the courts respond.
They could put limits on the president's power.
And make sure he's acting within the law.
So it seems like we're just at the beginning of a much bigger fight.
Over spending priorities and the future of our country.
This funding freeze is just the first step.
And it's going to be a long road ahead.
Well, folks, that about wraps up our deep dive into this federal funding freeze.
We hope you learned something new.
And that you have a better idea of what's at stake.
There's always more to explore, though.
So we encourage you to keep digging.
Read more about it. Think about it for yourself.
And don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions.
It's all about critical thinking.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
We'll see you next time.
Keep diving.